In this video, we're going to be talking about question banks in Canvas, and in particular, how we can use these question banks to assess learning outcomes in a rigorous way, while at the same time giving students, each one of them, individual exam that encourages as much as possible no cheating or academic integrity. So I'm going to walk you through how I have structured my assessment or a typical assessment in one of my courses, show you how I set up question banks, and then show you how to import those question banks into the individual assessment and mix those with non-question bank items. So the first thing is just making any kind of assessment. So we're going to go through an exam here. Obviously, the same thing works for any other assignment. I'm using new quizzes. I have a separate video for old quizzes. The methodology is basically the same, but one thing to note is that question banks for new quizzes in Canvas and question banks for old quizzes in Canvas are separate and distinct groups, and you cannot easily go back from one to the other. It is possible, but it is difficult, if I remember correctly. So you really need to invest in either the new quiz ecosystem or the old quiz ecosystem. I have on new quiz personally, and other people have gone old quiz. There are just minor differences, but you have to pick one or the other. So we'll go to the midterm, for instance, and then we will edit it. So everything here is perfectly normal. There's no difference. So when we go here to build, what you're going to see is that there are not individual questions. Well, for the most part. So these are for kind of assessment purposes. But notice that here it says 4 questions pulled randomly from this bank at data preprocessing. So let's go from kind of the outside in. So this is a description, but notice that if I click on this, I can say randomly select the number of questions and the number of points per question. I do this so that in total my number of points on my exam adds up to the correct amount. But really the way we should be thinking about this from a pedagogical perspective and assessment perspectives, what is the total number of points or the total percentage of points that you want to allocate to this particular learning objective? I know data preprocessing is large, kind of a large one, but you can go down to something like, here, this is a good example. For logistic regression, interpreting numerical coefficients associated with numerical variables and interpreting coefficients associated with categorical variables are different learning objectives. And so I actually have different question banks for those two learning objectives, so that I know that my assessment is measuring these things in the appropriate proportions. So let's go ahead and dive into one of these things. You can see the whole exam is like this, except for these questions at the top, which I typically, well, we can talk about why we do that later. So to get this running, we go up here to item banks with a little piggy. And what we're going to say is, so we can actually insert the things here. So for instance, if I wanted to do a new thing, let's do, I'll put something in and take it out. Let's just do the first one. Annuities and sinking funds. Okay, if I want to insert these questions, we'll talk about how to make these questions in a little bit. I would say insert all or random. And so notice that when I close this out, I now have this thing. So by default, it pulls all questions at one point. If you want to change this, you say, you click your thing, randomly select, I don't know, 5 questions at 4 points apiece or whatever, and say done. That's all you have to do to like once the item bank is completed, I just click the piggy at the top. I select the item bank that I want. I typically hit all, I insert all of them, and then I go through and allocate the points. Now, I want to point out too that if you wanted to put in a particular question, that's also possible from the item bank, but then students will get all the same thing. So I can go through and just say, just add this particular question. But that means every student will get that question. Every student will get that question. Whereas if I do the all random version, then questions are pulled randomly from those things. I'll also point out that if you go to settings and you shuffle the questions, these questions within the bank do not stick together. They all get spread out over the exam. So the shuffling really does work. So we can add individual questions. We can add questions from an item bank, either pulled randomly or add individual questions, but we haven't talked about how to actually make the question banks themselves. To do that, we go up here to the top triple dot and we say manage item banks. So this is all of the item banks across your account for new quizzes. So notice that just to keep myself sane, I have a prefix which is which course this is attached to. So these are for the old QTM 1000. These are for the old QTM 2000, which is kind of like the new AQM 2000. And so let's open up one of these. So if I wanted a new one, I just say new bank. But once you have one of these set up, you can just say, for instance, association rules conceptual. And then you can add any question type you want. So you can add, you could add formula questions. You could add a bunch of multiple choice. You could add numeric versions, whatever. But the key thing is that each one of these each one of these question banks, as much as possible, should concern exactly one learning objective. And this is one of my least favorite parts. There's a lot of clicking back and forth. But for instance, if it's compound interest or for QTM 1000, let's do QTM 2000, I have different learning objectives concerning support confidence and lift for association rules, for instance. Those are separate things that students should understand. And I want to make sure that each student is assessed on each one of these pieces in the same proportion. So every student will get 2 questions about lift and 2 questions about support and 2 questions about confidence. And in this way, we can ensure that students get the same type of assessment. Everyone's being assessed on the same learning objectives in the same proportions, but everyone's receiving different questions so that so it's more difficult to share answers. And especially if you use the randomization, it's very difficult. If you randomize the questions, randomize the answers, use formula questions as much as possible, and have question banks that are drawing things in, then you're going to be in really good shape to prevent students from collaborating in ways that you didn't intend. So obviously, always happy to chat more about these. You can just email me at ncarst@babson.edu or get in touch with me any other way, and we will chat more about this.